Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ishika Desle. I'm a second year BA Liberal Arts student from Amity University, Mumbai. On behalf of Amity Institute of Liberal Arts, I gladly welcome you all to this webinar session. Thank you for being here. India and Afghanistan, being neighbors in the Asian continent, have had historically significant and good bilateral relationship for many years. The political, economic, and cultural ties have stayed strong throughout the transforming political identity of Afghanistan. Maintaining these ties is important for both the nations, for trade, security, and various other purposes. And thus, it is important for us to understand what lies in front of us now that Afghanistan has been through a crisis. So, here we are to gain some knowledge about the Indo-Afghan relation in times of Afghan crisis, past, present, and way ahead. Today's webinar has been arranged under the initiative of Engaging Colossus, and we have with us Honorable Mr. Yashwant Sinha as the key speaker for the webinar. We also have our respected head of institute, Professor Deepak Havaldar sir, here with us today. And I would like to take this opportunity to request Professor Deepak Havaldar sir to come forward and speak a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all. And from the bottom of my heart, I welcome Yashwant Sinha sir, Honorable former Finance Minister and former External Affairs Minister of India. He has experienced different rungs of the administrative responsibilities. So I'm really interested in knowing that which responsibility like more, as an IS officer or as the Finance Minister or also the External Affairs Minister. Because the challenges are different. And who else will give the broader views on Afghan crisis than Yashwant Sinha sir? Sir, I'm thankful to you for accepting our invitation for Amity Institute of Liberal Arts. It's a part of Amity University, Mumbai. I know that you are extremely busy, but I'm really happy that you have accepted the invitation for our students and the faculty. I'm sure not only the students, but also the faculty will be immensely benefited by listening to the views Mr. Yashwant Sinha sir. Thank you, sir, once again, and I welcome you to Amity University, Mumbai. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce our key speaker for the afternoon, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, sir. Mr. Yashwant Sinha has served as the former External Affairs Minister of India. During his tenure, he has experienced different ties of relation with Afghanistan's economic and political setup. Recently, sir has also written few articles concerning with the same issue that we would be understanding today. It would be indeed intriguing to understand the perspective of Indo-Afghan relation from his experience and expertise. So without wasting any more time, I would now request Sinha sir to start with the session.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I always love to talk to young students wherever they are. And I remember having attended your programs also in the past. So when I got the invitation this time, I readily accepted it because I have some personal experience of dealing with Afghanistan. In any case, Afghanistan has always been a country of great interest to India. And early in my career in the External Affairs Ministry, tenure in the External Affairs Ministry, I decided to visit Afghanistan. And I spent 3 days in Afghanistan. And as was the practice in those days, because Afghanistan had just been liberated from Taliban, it was in 2002 that I visited Afghanistan. But I did not confine my visit only to Kabul. I went to various other places like Kandahar, like Herat, like Mazar-e-Sharif, and was able to interact with local administrators, governors, and the people. Now, one thought which remains predominant in my mind is the feeling of enormous friendship amongst the people of Afghanistan for India. Wherever I went, I found that people, the moment they learned that somebody from India had come, they would assemble on the road. And as I came out, they'll greet me, wave to me, and I greatly enjoyed this. That was also the time, you'll recall that Taliban was in control of Afghanistan between 1996 and 2001. And 2001, the famous attack on the Twin Towers in New York had taken place, after which the Americans had intervened. And Afghanistan was brought more or less under American rule, though they had Mr. Karzai as the formal president. You'll be surprised to know that when I visited Kabul in October 2002, the personal bodyguards of Mr. Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, were Americans. They were all over the place. And I remember particularly that when I landed in Kandahar, Kandahar is the place you'll recall where the Indian Airlines aircraft, which had been hijacked in 1999, had been taken. And many of the officials who had gone to Kandahar to negotiate with the terrorists then, they had accompanied me on this trip. But this trip was different. We were landing in much more agreeable circumstances in Kandahar. But when I came out of the aircraft, I noticed that there was no reception committee. There was nobody to welcome me. And only some gun-toting American soldiers came around out of curiosity to see who had come. Then a big burly man came running towards me. He was obviously breathing very hard and introduced himself as the governor of Kandahar. I'm narrating this experience because this is a very important message. Now, he told me in his language, he said, "Excellency, I'm very sorry that I got delayed in coming to receive you. I had come to the airport in time, but I was physically being frisked by the American soldiers here, and that took longer than I had expected, and that's why I've got delayed in coming to the aircraft and receiving you." Now, I was very surprised because he was, after all, the local governor, and though the Americans were in charge of the security at the airport, frisking the local governor is something which the Afghans would not have liked. And I told my colleagues on that day that the Americans are not going to last very long, because what you're seeing here is the face of the ugly American. We are all aware of the history. The Americans went in to control of Afghanistan. They had installed regimes which were mere puppets and were highly corrupt. And ultimately, therefore, when they finally left this year, everyone around the world said, oh, they were surprised that Taliban was able to just walk over and take control of Kabul. There was no resistance. And even the Northern Alliance resistance in Panjshir Valley, that also vanished after a while. And today, Taliban is in control of the whole of Afghanistan. It's not good news, but it's a fact. So, as far as the present crisis in Afghanistan is concerned, I would blame the Americans wholly and squarely for this crisis. They spent 20 years in Afghanistan, maybe $3 trillion or more. A lot of lives were lost. At the end of it, they just abandoned Afghanistan. And we are not going to forget in a hurry the scenes that we saw in Kabul, especially at the airport, of people who wanted to flee Afghanistan. They're falling from the aircraft and all kinds of things. Now, this was eminently avoidable. The American withdrawal could have been planned better so that it did not result in this kind of crisis. But that's a thing of the past. Afghanistan has always been a very complicated country. It's been complicated because it has had a checkered history. It is complicated because it sits astride the main routes which connect South Asia with Central Asia, which connect East Asia with West Asia, and finally to Europe. So throughout the centuries, Afghanistan has been a very critically important state for all players in that region. And you are aware of the fact that earlier there was a great game going on in Central Asia, including Afghanistan, between the British and the Russians. And the Russians were seeking access to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea through Afghanistan. And the British were trying to prevent it. So Afghanistan has always had, what shall I say, the distinction or the notoriety of being in the center of things as far as South Asia is concerned. For us, Afghanistan, apart from the love of the people that we enjoy, has always been critically important. We lost access to Central Asia because of the creation of Pakistan. And Pakistan will not allow us any route via its territory to approach Afghanistan and go into Central Asia. And therefore, we had to go to Iran. I remember even when I was flying to Afghanistan to Kabul, I traveled via Iran because airspace of Pakistan was not available. Now, Iran is our access to Central Asia, and that's why Chabahar port has assumed such critical importance for India. So from Chabahar, we'll go into Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan, we'll go into Central Asia. And that's why we have contributed to building that road from Chabahar to the border of Afghanistan, and then within Afghanistan, from Delaram to Zaranj and onwards. So it is our only route. Afghanistan is our only route to Central Asia at the moment, land route. And if, for instance, if Taliban, at the moment, we don't have any diplomatic relationship with Taliban, but if Taliban were to stop, as they have, then we have no access except through their route to Central Asia. So Afghanistan has been very, very important for India all the time. What has been our two great assets as far as Afghanistan is concerned? When Afghanistan was liberated by the Americans from Taliban control in 2001, and especially when I visited Afghanistan in 2002, October, we started a whole lot of development work in Afghanistan. I remember I was in Herat and I met with the local governor who was considered to be a warlord, a gentleman called Ismail Khan. He gave me a welcome which was fit for a head of state. And I asked him, I said, what can we do for you? And he said, please get our Salma Dam completed. And immediately after coming back, I got Salma Dam, which was a irrigation cum hydroelectric generation project completed, which was inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi later and is known today as the Friendship Dam. Similarly, we constructed the parliament building for Afghanistan in Kabul. We helped Afghanistan in agriculture so that the farmers could be weaned away from cultivating opium. We helped Afghanistan create its own airline. I remember when I went to Kabul, I had taken 3 aircraft with me of Indian Airlines, which we gifted to Afghanistan then. We organized the urban transport in Kabul. So we did enormous amount of development work. You know, the $3 billion work, which we claim we have done, has all been very usefully utilized for the benefit of the people of Afghanistan. And that's why the people of Afghanistan are even more friendly today towards India. So our two assets are the friendship of the people of Afghanistan and the enormous amount of developmental work which we'll do. I'll give you an interesting example. There is a famous Habibia school in Kabul. And most of these rulers of Afghanistan have gone to the Habibia school for their education. I visited the Habibia school. I got a very warm reception from the students of the Habibia school. And I remember telling them that this is like my visiting a school in my constituency. You've been so warm. But then I noticed that the Habibia school had been damaged during the earlier conflict, considerably damaged. And I said, we'll reconstruct the buildings of the Habibia school for you. And we spent, I think, $1 million or so to rebuild those buildings. So we have done this kind of work in Afghanistan. India is very popular in Afghanistan, but the unfortunate part is that Pakistan, which is not liked in Afghanistan very much, Pakistan has always been competing with India in Afghanistan. And that's what makes Afghanistan a theater of competition between India and Pakistan, which is neither good for India nor for Pakistan, and certainly not for the people of Afghanistan. But for some reason, Pakistan does want to leave us alone and is competing with favors in Afghanistan. So the point which I'd like to make is Afghanistan is critically important for global good. It is critically important for India. It is critically important for the region. And we can't and should not allow Afghanistan to fall into the hands of elements which are either not friendly to us or do not believe in the values in which we believe. Now, Taliban, unfortunately, is a force which does not share our values. And the main moot question is, therefore, how should India deal with Taliban? I'm glad the international community has come to the conclusion that there is no question of recognizing the Taliban regime in Kabul in a hurry. India also should wait and watch. And I'll say, we have contact with Taliban in Doha and elsewhere. I would say that India should emphasize on the Taliban regime that if they really want India's recognition, or they want friendly ties, or they want international recognition and India to help, there are 3-4 things which they must do. Number one, they should not, as we have repeatedly said already, allow the territory of Afghanistan to be used for violence against India. That is, or for the rest of the world. That's very important. The second is that we must emphasize that they should rule in a democratic way. It cannot be Taliban regime without elections for years and years, as they did between 1996 and 2001. So they must lay down a democratic map for Afghanistan. The third is we should insist that they will maintain human values in terms of how we understand it and how the United Nations Charter understands human values, human rights. The fourth is they must behave well with women. They cannot treat women as cattle and expect the international community to go with it. So we must insist that women should get their rights in Afghanistan, as in the earlier regime, and that we cannot be friendly with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan if they don't treat their women well. So there should be equal opportunity for women in Afghanistan as far as education is concerned, services is concerned, advancement generally in life is concerned. There must be complete equality. So these are the few things that India should insist upon before we deal with Taliban or we give any recognition to the regime of Taliban. Hopefully, Afghanistan, the rulers of Afghanistan, the Taliban or others, will realize that ultimately the most important thing in the world and in the region is peace. And countries can prosper only where there is peace. Countries will not be able to prosper if they live in an environment which is full of conflict and violence. If they realize this, then we can do business with Taliban, with Afghanistan. If they don't, then we'll wait like we waited between 96 and 2001. The only point is that they should not repeat what they did in 2001 with the Twin Towers in the US, in New York. If they indulge in that kind of thing, then, of course, all bets are off, and the world community will be free to take whatever action is appropriate against the regime in Afghanistan. So I'll end here. Thank you very much. And I'll expect questions now from the students.
Thank you so much, sir. Understanding this relevant topic from you was definitely an enlightening session. And so considering your experience in this particular field, we know that we have a lot to learn from you. The students as well as the faculty members now can text their questions in the chat box, and I will read them out for you. But first I will let Siddharth sir ask his question. Sir, please go ahead.
Sir, analyzing the Afghan crisis and what observations you have put in right now, I was wondering if India, can we say that India is entering into a situation of hostility in its neighborhood, considering the kind of influence Pakistan and China are having on Afghanistan, and already we have a complex relation with these two nations?
You're absolutely right. I mean, at the moment, the present situation is not to India's advantage. We are aware of the fact that China, this Taliban group, which is in control in Kabul, they have all been nurtured in or by Islamabad. They were staying in Quetta in Balochistan, and they were being fed and clothed and armed by Pakistan. And as I said in my earlier presentation, that Pakistan is continuously trying to reduce India's influence in Afghanistan and replace that influence with its own influence. They have not succeeded so far. Let's see what the future holds for us. The second point which I'd like to make is that we know that China does not have any moral values in its foreign policy or even in its domestic policy. I know that countries have to be realistic in their foreign policy. They have to propound a foreign policy which subserves the national interest of that country. But China is a completely immoral world power. So while we have reservations, for instance, in dealing with Taliban, China will have no reservation, just as China did not have any reservation in dealing with the militaristic regime in Myanmar, which we did not recognize for many years. So that is where we experience a disadvantage vis-a-vis China, because China does not stand by any of these principles and deals with whoever is in charge and whoever is prepared to serve China's interests. So we have a very difficult situation with China to our east and Pakistan to our west, converging in Afghanistan and in Central Asia as a whole, in fact, and working against our interest. And it will be a test of our diplomacy to ensure that despite these challenges, we are able to ensure that our interests in Afghanistan and in Central Asia do not suffer.
Right, sir. Thank you. Ishika, you can take forward the questions from students and chat section.
Yes, sir. So I myself have couple of questions. Um, Afghanistan is one of the largest producer of heroin and opium, right? And as it has been observed in the past that sale of these two drugs was a major source of income for the Taliban government. Are there any chances that there could be an increase in the smuggling of drugs into India? And what can India do to prevent or contain this smuggling?
Well, we have already experienced this. You're aware of the fact that at Kandla port, some 3,000 kgs of heroin was recently confiscated or caught, and the value runs into 21,000 crore rupees or so. So we are already experiencing the danger of drugs flowing from Afghanistan. And you are absolutely right in saying that this become a major source of income for Taliban. And that's why I referred to in my presentation, I referred to the help that we were trying to give to the farmers in Afghanistan in the field of agriculture so that they do not take to opium cultivation. This is a global problem, and the global community will have to come together to ensure that Afghanistan does not become the epicenter of distribution of drugs worldwide or of terrorism, which will be financed by this trade.
Right, sir. So I have another question. How the trade is going to be affected, as you mentioned that India has now lost the access to connectivity route between us and the Central Asia. How the trade will be affected and what can India do about this, sir?
We have not lost the connectivity. The road is still there. Chabahar port is still there.
Right.
And even earlier, whatever was exported from Afghanistan and whatever was exported from India to Afghanistan was coming through this land route up to Chabahar port and from there by ships to India. Afghanistan has a major interest in exporting its dry fruits to India, as you're aware. And I remember during my visit to Afghanistan, especially in Kandahar, the local authorities were talking to me about facilitating the trade of dry fruits, the export of dry fruits from Afghanistan to India. And I remember we had even offered some concessions to them in tariffs for facilitating and increasing this trade. So Afghanistan has very limited goods to offer as far as exports are concerned, and the dry fruits are the most important. So we'll have to, if we want to help Afghanistan at some point of time, we'll have to facilitate the import of dry fruits from Afghanistan, which will help the Afghan economy.
Right, sir. I have one more question, sir. Even if Taliban assures us that they will not let any terrorist organization make use of Afghanistan territory for attacking Indian land or Indian citizens, should we really accept and believe them, or should we stay alert and take some measures concerning the security issues?
I'll answer this question in a general way. India has been a victim of terrorism for almost 3 decades now. Okay, 3 decades. It's not a small period of time. The world has not bothered much about India being at the receiving end of cross-border terrorism. And therefore, as an Indian, I have always felt that it is our national responsibility to protect our people and our borders from terrorism. It's our responsibility, and we must fulfill it. We can't go running to US or Russia or anyone else saying, please help us because we are victims of terrorism. Nobody is going to help you because they have their own concerns. So it is our responsibility. We must fight this scourge and ensure that our people are not hurt through terrorist attacks, whether they originate from Afghanistan or they originate from Pakistan or they are homegrown. That is our national responsibility, and we must ensure it. Now, I have already mentioned to you that as and when we talk to Taliban, if the situation so warrants, the first thing that we should insist upon is that they will not export terrorism and violence to India. That will be their starting point.
Right, sir. So I'll take questions from others now. This is a question from student Ananya. Since the Panjshir rebellion against the Taliban government has now been neutralized, is there a possibility that the Northern Alliance can once again stand up and fight? And can India in some way support their cause, and should India do it?
You see, Northern Alliance has already been vanquished, even in Panjshir Valley. And there used to be a great leader of Northern Alliance earlier, at the end of the last century, beginning of this one, called Commander Masood. Now, Commander Masood was killed by terrorists. His son is in control now, but obviously it's not the same thing as it used to be in the past. So Northern Alliance is not as effective as it was in the past. And therefore, at the moment, even if India helps Northern Alliance, it's not going to cut much ice. It's not going to make much of an impression. And we must wait and see what developments take place, because you are aware that women, for instance, have often risen in rebellion against the present regime. So the best antidote to a terrorist regime like Taliban at the moment in Afghanistan is the reaction and the rebellion of its own people. And hopefully the people of Afghanistan will ensure that they have a regime which they like and not a regime which is unwelcome. We can help to an extent, but we can't really interfere, certainly not militarily.
Right, sir. I'll move on to next question, sir. According to the agreement signed in Doha, Taliban is supposed to make an inclusive government which will include women. But according to the government which was announced by the Taliban, it did not include women and rather had ministers which are UN designated terrorists. What would you like to say on this? Because if the delegation of Afghanistan includes such personalities, then do you think India or the international community will ever recognize such Taliban-led government, even if they decide to wait and watch right now?
No, we should not. I think as far as India is concerned, we should be very clear in our mind that as long as they have this kind of government in Kabul, which include terrorists as home minister, we can't deal with this government. I like to remind you that the mistake for the present situation in Afghanistan lies entirely at the door of the US. When President Trump was in charge in the US, you'll recall that in March of last year, he had signed a deal with Taliban and accorded legitimacy to Taliban. And therefore, Taliban were strengthened. And there was no resistance to Taliban, popular resistance, when they overran Kabul. So I'll once again repeat that the Taliban, that Afghanistan, we must understand the nature of that country. If there is no foreign interference in Afghanistan, then the Afghans will fight among themselves. The moment there is a foreign intervention, then they will all unite and fight against
the foreign intervention,
that foreign force. And you are aware of the history of the British in Afghanistan. They had set up a very big camp in Kabul, and the British commander was a very popular person, or that's what he thought. There came a day when he was butchered, and each one of the British soldiers who wanted to retreat to India, each one of them was killed, butchered on the way, except one doctor who was able to return to Peshawar. So that is the kind of people that we are faced with. And the Americans did not recognize or learn from the history of Afghanistan, learn from the nature of its people. The British paid a heavy price for this. Hopefully, in India, we understand Afghanistan better, and hopefully the government of India will deal with Afghanistan with that understanding of the history and the nature of Afghanistan.
Right, sir. There's one more question which is quite connected to this topic. What is your stand on recent statement of Taliban on addressing the UN General Assembly? Can UN give them the recognition, international recognition?
No, that issue has been settled by the UN. They have disallowed Taliban representative from coming and addressing the UN General Assembly. On the other hand, they have allowed the earlier representative of the Ashraf Ghani government that privilege of addressing the UN General Assembly. So they have not recognized the Taliban regime, and I'm happy they have taken this decision.
Right, sir. With China looking to offer relations with Taliban and with mine being a special focus, what will Taliban's policy be in respect to leasing out crucial lithium and rare earth material mines, considering in past this sector saw huge tariffs and corruption practices?
It is not easy, but China could play this game. It is looking at the huge valuable mineral reserves in Afghanistan, and it might offer financial aid. Our aid was untied when we spent $3 billion in helping Afghanistan. We did not say, give us mining rights, give us this, give us that. It was a purely friendly gesture. Now we know that given its nature, the Chinese regime will look for returns, and that return could be in terms of mining rights in Afghanistan. Whether they'll succeed, whether even the Taliban regime in Afghanistan would like to part with these valuable minerals which are lying underground is a moot question. But we, as I said, we are facing a real danger there. If China succeeds in persuading the Taliban government of Afghanistan, then we'll have to think afresh about how we deal with the situation.
Right, sir.
Ishika, Havaldar sir has a question. I think he got disconnected from his end. He's joined here with me. Just a second.
Right.
Yes, you can talk.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Was it expected that when US had taken the decision to withdraw the forces from Afghanistan, was it expected that Taliban would take over, or was it a surprise for everyone? Because Mr. Trump had made the comment that they should not have done this, withdrew the forces from Afghanistan, and they did it in hurriedly. So was it expected that Taliban would take over?
I'll answer this question in two parts. One is that Trump being Trump, he himself is responsible for that, signing that March 2020 agreement with Taliban. He was the president of US when this agreement was signed. And he, as I've said earlier, lent legitimacy to Taliban and paved the way for Taliban to walk into Kabul and take control of Afghanistan whenever the American troops withdrew. This is one part. So Trump has no right to blame anyone else. The second is, I told you earlier that the American withdrawal from Afghanistan could have been and should have been better planned. It should not have resulted in such chaos as it did. A third part of my answer will be yes to your question. It should have been expected that in the absence of any other force, Taliban is going to take over Afghanistan. People were at that point of time wondering at the speed with which Taliban returned to Kabul and took control of Kabul without firing a single shot. But anyone who is familiar with Afghanistan would have known that this is exactly what would happen. So America, in a way, created the confusion in the course of its withdrawal, and America, in a way, paved the way for Taliban to take control of Afghanistan. It's directly, the US is directly responsible for the chaos in Afghanistan today.
Right, sir. So next question. Now that Taliban has formed a government in Afghanistan, what moves could India probably take in order to prevent terrorism in Kashmir particularly?
I have already told you that preventing terrorist attacks within our territory, especially from the outside, is our sole and sacred responsibility. Nobody else is going to fight your battles. India has to fight its own battles against terrorism. And therefore, we should take whatever it takes, take whatever steps are necessary in order to prevent those cross-border attacks on our territory. Of course, our agencies would be fully aware of the kind of encouragement which the terrorist groups in Pakistan and in Afghanistan are getting at the moment from both the Pakistani regime as well as the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. If there is a Haqqani who used to run the Haqqani network, he is the Home Minister of Afghanistan, then what can we expect?
Right.
So therefore, we must take all the steps which are necessary to protect our people against terrorist attacks.
Right, sir. So you mean we should always stay alert? We cannot just rely on what Taliban says.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right, sir. I'll take the next question, sir. Do you think USA leaving Afghanistan was the right thing to do because they knew the consequences very well? And was it really about economy that US worried because they had put in a lot of financial, what can we say, investments in a way in Afghanistan?
They should have anticipated it. I told you that the American rule in Afghanistan, and there is no other way to describe it, lasted 20 years. They spent over $3 trillion.
Right.
A lot of people were killed. But the regimes they installed in Afghanistan, puppet regimes, were also highly corrupt, and they could not win the confidence of the people of Afghanistan. That was the problem. But the Americans should have learned from history.
Right.
In dealing with Afghanistan, we must always keep the history of Afghanistan in mind. I've told you the Afghans have, throughout their history, rebuffed and repulsed any aggression from the outside. And this is something that we should have remembered. The Americans should have remembered, because earlier, the Russians occupied Afghanistan and came a cropper. I mean, they lost Afghanistan. And how did they lose Afghanistan? What is Taliban? Taliban is the creation of the Americans. They combined with Pakistan and elements in Saudi Arabia to create Taliban as a force against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Who created a Frankenstein, and now they are reaping the world, the consequences.
Right, sir. I'll take the next question. What are the immediate and biggest challenges that Taliban government might face now?
The biggest challenge is, I'll say, economic and financial. Their economy is in ruins. People are suffering. There is a humanitarian crisis In Afghanistan, some of the world agencies are trying to help, but the international community is still holding back. So there is a huge crisis. The foreign exchange reserves of Afghanistan have been frozen, so they are not available to the Taliban regime. We don't really know how the people of Afghanistan are coping with this situation, but Afghanistan is in a total mess, economically, politically, from the law and order point of view, from the point of view of human rights.
Right, sir. I'll take up the next question. Taliban has shown interest in joining China's Belt and Road Initiative. Do you think this is alarming situation for India?
Sorry. As we must realize that Taliban regime is under the influence of Pakistan and China. And therefore, whatever they do should not surprise us. Whatever China and Pakistan do also should not surprise us. The present situation in Afghanistan, in our neighborhood, both in the East and West, is not to our advantage. We must bide our time, and for the present, we must take all the steps which are necessary to prevent any permanent loss to our interests in Afghanistan and Central Asia. We should be, for instance, in contact with the Russians, which we are, with regard to what the Russian policy towards Afghanistan is. Russia appears to be standing more with Pakistan and China at the moment. And we should coordinate with Iran, which has issues with the present regime in Afghanistan. And we should, put together a coalition of countries which are concerned with Afghanistan, with what's happening, and ensure that the international community also plays its part in dealing with Afghanistan.
Right, sir. I'll take up the next question. How did it happen that few thousand of Taliban fighters were able to defeat 3 lakh Afghan army soldiers, which was equipped with American gifted arms and support?
Because ultimately, for any force to fight a battle or a war is a question of its mindset, its determination to fight. Right. The Afghan army did not have the determination to fight Taliban. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if at a later date it emerges that many of those recruits in the Afghan army were Taliban elements. So America not only lost Afghanistan, they have left behind such huge stocks of sophisticated arms and equipment in Afghanistan, which has all fallen in the hands of Taliban, and their military capabilities have been strengthened as a result of these American arms and equipments. So the foolishness of US policy in Afghanistan has known no bounds.
Right, sir. I'll add on to this question, sir. I have read in news that US claimed that these ammunitions were not really that of, high alarming concern for US specifically. So does it really mean something like, is it true that it's not of concerning issue for us or US at present, or are the ammunition really strong and we should be concerned about it?
Why should they keep in their arms dump in Afghanistan dud equipment, dud explosives? Will any country do it? So I don't believe the Americans. Fact of the matter is they have left a huge supply of sophisticated weapons, which has today fallen in the hands of Afghanistan. And I would remind you that when Taliban took over Kabul, one of the dangers which was predicted for our country was not only the fallout in Jammu and Kashmir, the terrorist fallout, but also the sophisticated equipment that which had fallen in the hands of Taliban, and which could be used to arm the terrorists to attack India, especially in Jammu and Kashmir.
So you say that US is just claiming this to hide their mistakes,
Yeah, I have no doubt about it.
right? So, I'll go on to the next question.
Ishika, sorry to interrupt. I had a question,
Yeah,
which is, yeah. So good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So my question was, like, there are statements from Sohail Shaheen, who is the current spokesperson of Taliban, where he is observed saying that they have come to maintain peace, and which is in a way true that they, without even shooting a bullet, they've conquered the entire Afghanistan, and they are ready to maintain peaceful relations with other countries as well. So, what are your says in regards to these statements?
My take on this is, let's not take them at their face value.
Okay.
We are aware how they have treated women in Afghanistan after they took over the reins of government in Kabul. We are aware of how they have treated individuals, how they have hanged them by the street pole, hanged them high. That is not, maintenance of human rights. Where was the trial held? When was the trial held? Who tried them? Who convicted them to death, etc. are all questions which have not been answered. So some of the actions of Taliban have been brutish, to say the least, and therefore only bland statements will not do. These statements must be followed by conduct on the ground. And the most important test of that conduct, to my mind, is twofold. One, how they treat their women, and two, how they maintain law and order.
Right, sir. Okay, do you
Yes.
have another question?
No, absolutely. That's it.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
I'll move on to the next question then. How did India blundered with Iran in foreign policy regarding Charbahar port and oil purchase?
Let me put it in a certain perspective. Iran has always had a very difficult relationship with the US. And you are aware of the Iranian moves on the nuclear weapons front, though they claim that they have no desire to become a nuclear weapon state. But the Americans have always suspected that the Iranians have nuclear weapons ambitions. Now, India has been caught in this competition or in this bad blood between Iran and the US, because it's very important for us to maintain good relations with the US. It is equally important for us to maintain good relations with Iran. And this is the difficult balance that I remember we had maintained when Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister and I was the External Affairs Minister, of dealing with Iran, which is very, very important for us, for the oil that we get from them, and for access to Central Asia. So therefore, there is no question of bringing any or allowing any deterioration in our relationship with Iran. At the same time, we must explain to the US that they may have their concerns with Iran, but they should not force their point of view on us in dealing with our bilateral dealing with Iran.
Right, sir. I'll move on to the next question now. As pictures of Chinook helicopters hovering over US Embassy in Kabul, reminiscent of similar scenes from Saigon 45 years ago, have gone viral on social media platforms, The tendency to draw parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan seems irresistible. How is American involvement in Afghanistan different from Vietnam?
In two ways. One is that when the Americans went into Vietnam, they had a force called Viet Cong, which had defeated the French and were fighting the Americans. And ultimately, the Viet Cong prevailed militarily. And we saw those scenes of the US helicopter hovering and how people were evacuated from the top of the US embassy building. The similarities, what shall I say, is very peculiar, because earlier the Viet Cong had defeated the French, then they defeated the Americans. In the case of Afghanistan, the Afghans had earlier defeated the Russians, and then after 20 years, they defeated the Americans. So in both cases, two superpowers were defeated by local forces. But the American withdrawal was more orderly, I should think. We saw that rush at the Kabul airport, but those were people from Afghanistan. The American troops, American citizens, American sympathizers were by and large able to live in peace, and the Taliban did not much disturb. In fact, they facilitated their passage to the airport to be able to leave. So there are similarities, there are differences, but at the end, there is no doubt that America lost Vietnam, and there is no doubt that America has lost Afghanistan.
Right, sir. I'll move on to next question, sir.
Ishika, before you continue, sir, I just wanted to know, do we have 15-20 minutes more for the Q&A, if you don't mind?
No,
Because,
I can.
Yes, because there are a lot of questions coming in the chat section. I don't want to be fair to all the students.
I'll just help myself with a glass of water.
Sure, sir. Sure. Please. Ishika, you can continue.
Yeah, continue.
Yes.
Right, sir. This is rather a large question to be okay. A role of Pakistan in supporting Taliban in Afghanistan.
Well, we are fully aware of the fact that this Taliban has been fully supported by Pakistan. This Taliban has been nurtured by Pakistan. This Taliban's leaders have stayed in Pakistan. They have been helped by Pakistan. So the ISI of Pakistan has been directly responsible for looking after Taliban, arming Taliban, motivating Taliban, and ultimately helping them to take over Afghanistan. So let's not be in any doubt about the malevolent influence of Pakistan over Taliban. And as I told you earlier, China and Pakistan have absolutely no moral values in their foreign policy, just as they don't have it in their domestic policy. And therefore, it's very difficult to deal with such countries.
That's right, sir. There's a repetition of questions. So, is US indirect supporter of Taliban?
Is US indirect support? No, I wouldn't go to that extent. I mean, they supported Taliban when the Taliban was formed to fight the Russians. And I've already told you that they created a Frankenstein. And today they are facing a Frankenstein of their own creation. But today they are not supporting the Taliban because the Taliban is fighting the Americans.
Right, sir. So one more question. The support that Pakistan has been giving to Taliban, how should we be worried about it? And what effects is India going to have because of the support?
We should be very worried about Pakistan's support to the present Taliban regime. In Afghanistan, the Chinese support to the present regime in Afghanistan. And there are 2-3 ways in which we'll have to deal it. One is we must stay alert. We must strengthen our own whatever steps are needed in order to be able to protect ourselves within our own country from terrorist attacks from outside. The second is we must work with the international community to ensure that they don't take a step which will help Pakistan, China, and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And third, we should have our own policy in dealing with Taliban in Afghanistan, and that should be, we should not recognize this regime of Taliban unless they really reform themselves. And I've already mentioned to you those 3-4 things on which we should be able to judge them.
Right, sir. So your inputs have been definitely cleared a lot of doubts. Thank you for taking out some time from your busy schedule for us. It was really enlightening. Now I request Akib to extend the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ishika. So I would like to express my gratitude to all esteemed delegates of the webinar for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a really great success. I extend my gratitude to our honorable chief guest, Mr. Yashwant Sinha, to take out time from his busy schedule to grace the event. Thank you for inspiring and encouraging us with your words, as well as enlightening us with the ongoing Afghan crisis. A special thanks to Professor Deepak Hawaldar, sir, Head of Institute of Amity, Institute of Liberal Arts, for providing immense support to make this webinar successful. I must thank the organizing team, volunteers, as well as the technical team for working hard for the past few days to make this webinar successful. Last but not the least, on behalf of the entire organizing committee of the Institute, I would like to specially thank all our viewers who took their time and participated in this information-loaded webinar. Thanks a lot for participating in this amazing webinar. With this, I, Akib Abid Mullah, sign off and would like to hand over the proceedings to. Are there any questions left, Ishika?
No, Akib, I think we're done.
Okay, we are done. Okay, then we can end this session here.
Thank
Thank you
you.
everyone for joining.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.